What's up, everybody? This is Joe Arpasi, otherwise known as Let Purple Rain. I started off my college fantasy football analysis work in 2008 as a co-owner of collegefootballgeek.com, of which I was running the website with my partner until 2016. I'd stepped away from the industry and I came back this year in 2024 under the new moniker Let Purple Rain. You are watching the Let Purple Rain podcast here on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to the channel and never miss one new episode that comes out. I'll be putting out new episodes throughout the year. Also, head over to letpurplerain.com, which is where I have all of my college fantasy football information. Right now, we're wrapping up championship week of the 2024 CFF season. I have waiver wire article, player rankings, and start sit suggestions, which you're watching right now. Premium subscribers get access to everything that I offer on the site, and free subscribers get limited preview access like what you're watching right now. Starting next month, I'm excited to bring out the 2024 CFF Top Gun Challenge. This competition has some of the top CFF sites around the internet. This year's class involves Campus to Canton, Let Purple Rain, RotoWire, and the CFF site. These four websites are going to be going head to head to see who had the most accurate preseason player projections compared to the final stats of this season. Right now, let's dive into the Stardom Situm preview for Week 14. Here, I'm going to go over my honorable mention picks. I'm doing a change this week. A lot of times, I may bring up smaller name players for start suggestions. I'm not doing that here. I'm focusing more on big names. This week's waiver wire article was basically a start article for waiver wire players since there's only 1 week that you can use them. So I did cover a number of players and covered some of the information that I do here in that article. So it's kind of a supplement to the start sit. This one, if you want to see all of the big name players that I have in mind, go over to letpurplerain.com. The article will have both this preview as well as the main section of this podcast. There's a link to the article in the description below. Definitely go check it out. Now that I've gotten that all out of the way, let's dive into some college fantasy football. I'm going to start this off here by letting you guys know that all of the stats that you see provided on the screen are the same stats that I use in my own research for player rankings. The fantasy team rankings that you see, I calculate those by taking the team stats, but then I apply fantasy points to those stats. I then re-rank all of the teams based off of the fantasy point totals. I do not purely use yardage. Since we are in fantasy football, we're going to do this off of fantasy points, and that's how I make my fantasy team rankings. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's jump into Lenore Sellers from South Carolina. He's been on fire. He scored 36 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. He's been doing it in the air and on the ground. This is a game where I definitely disagree with Vegas, thinking that South Carolina is only going to score 23 points. I think South Carolina's offense has a very good chance of getting at least 4 touchdowns in this one. When you look over at the Clemson defense, they're the number 64th ranked fantasy pass defense, and they're giving up 1.6 passing touchdowns per game. One thing that's rough here, they have the number 33 fantasy run defense. That's not very good. They're giving up 1 rushing touchdown per game, which is also not very good. But something that is really good is that they're giving up 4.4 yards per carry. Their average on third down conversions, the red zone touchdown rate, I think might be a big difference in this one. They're giving up 62% touchdowns in the red zone to opposing offenses. Anything that hits 60% and above, I really like. So Sellers is in this nice range here with Clemson giving up those touchdowns at 62% of the time. I think South Carolina is going to be really fired up for this game. It's been a while since they've been able to really take it to Clemson. They've got chances of trying to make the SEC championship game, and I think they're going to come out with their hair on fire. I think that their offense is going to outperform these matchup stats. So even though I went through them mentioning things that are bad, things that are good, I think that this game's not going to be played so much on the stats as you're going to see it played off of the emotions that the South Carolina offense is going to bring in this one. For a similar matchup, you can look at Texas A&M. This game occurred at the start of Sellers' hot streak, and they had the number 61 fantasy pass defense. And in that game, he put up 36.8 fantasy points. I think he's definitely going to have a great matchup here. And like I said, I think emotions are going to play high for the Gamecocks. I think they're going to have a big day. For my sit suggestion, I'm going to go with Caden Salter, Liberty. He really hasn't lived up to that preseason QB1 ranking that a lot of websites had in the industry. He's been playing modest lately. So he's not bad, but definitely not that QB1, QB2 that a lot of us envisioned all the way back in the preseason. Over the last 3 games, he is averaging 23.5 fantasy points. And when you kind of look over how he's getting his touches, he has a pretty close balance of pass and run mix over the last 3 games. He's thrown the ball 42 times and he's run the ball, excuse me, he's thrown the ball 42 times and he's run the ball 33 times. And you look at this matchup with Sam Houston, they're tough against the pass and the run. They're number 24 in fantasy pass defense. That's really bad for a matchup. And in the air, they're giving up 1.1 passing touchdowns per game, which is not good. They're the number 51 fantasy run defense, which is not terrible. They're a little better than middle of the pack. They are giving up 3.8 yards per carry, which is good for Salter. And then the 1.3 rushing touchdowns per game, the red zone touchdown rate, those are all kind of average numbers, right in the middle. I think I think that this is going to be the best fantasy defense that he's faced all year, and it's going to be tough. Um, this run defense is the best fantasy run defense he's faced all year, and this fantasy pass defense is the second best that he's faced all year. So it's going to be uphill sledding for Salter. And looking, I'm looking at last week's game with Western Kentucky as probably the best comparable matchup that we have here. It's not a perfect comparison. It's just kind of the best mix I can try and find of someone who is good against the pass, but there's just really nobody that's also been good against the run. And like I mentioned, he's close to equal for his touches, throwing the ball as well as running it. Western Kentucky, they're only the number 102nd fantasy run defense, so it's not the best matchup. And he put up 22 fantasy points on that one. I'm expecting him to hit under 20 fantasy points this week. This next selection kind of pains me here. I'm going to be a CFF professional. I'm going to let my emotions out of this and do my job. I'm going to recommend that you start Jordan James, Oregon against Washington this week. Over the last 3 weeks, he's averaging 18.1 points per game. That number's been affected by an injury. And the Maryland game on the 9th of this month, he got hurt and he only had 7 carries. That really kind of lowered down what we've been seeing for this point per game average over the last 3 weeks. I'm a little surprised that the Oregon fantasy run offense is only ranked 49th. I mean, normally you're thinking Oregon offense, they're going to be top 20, maybe top 10 for a fantasy rush offense. And they're not. And it's a bit surprising to me, but I have a feeling they're going to be playing a lot better than that 49th rank that we currently see. A lot of these, there's some good and some average in this matchup. The average matchup stats that you see here with Washington is they're number 59 fantasy run defense, 1.3 rushing touchdowns per game, and the 54% red zone touchdown rate. Good matchups here is that they're giving up 4.3 yards per carry, and they have a third down conversion allowed rate of 43%. For James, I think he's going to be able to take advantage of this. I know that the Washington run defense is worse than their stats show. And this, I think, is going to be a big game that he's going to be able to exploit. Looking at the similar matchups, Maryland was a game that I mentioned earlier. He was hurt. He only had 7 carries. Their fantasy run defense is ranked 54th, and he was still able to put up 13.6 fantasy points on 7 carries, which is nuts. Michigan State was ranked 53rd in fantasy run defense, and he put up 24 points on them. I think that the other big key factor here is that Oregon is 0-3 versus Washington under Dan Landy. I think they're looking for revenge this game. I think the Ducks and James are going to be flying high at the end of the night. For a sit, and this one's kind of tough. I want you to stick with me here because this isn't a hard sit. This is a cautious selection, but it's Woody Marks for USC. And I kind of break it down to one big question. Can he score 17 fantasy points? He's only been held under that number twice. Last week against UCLA and against Wisconsin. This game, Penn State is the best comparable matchup. He just broke 17 fantasy points against them. Um, and when you kind of look over the Penn State game and this upcoming Notre Dame game, and I'm viewing how each team is. First off, USC gets to play both of them in LA. That's pretty even match there. Um, Penn State had the number 3 fantasy run defense. Notre Dame has number 19. Penn State gives up 3.2 yards per carry. Notre Dame 3.5. Rushing touchdowns allowed per game. Penn State's given up 0.5. Notre Dame 0.8. And red zone touchdown rate. Penn State's given up touchdowns 40% of the time. Notre Dame 50% of the time. Looking at that comparison, you can see Notre Dame's a little worse across the board, but they're pretty darn close to what Penn State did. And like I mentioned, Marks did just break 17 points in that game. I think with the rivalry hype and for Notre Dame with college football playoff motives, they may play a bit higher than what we see with these stats. I think Marks could still be a safe floor play. I just want you to temper your expectations. Like I said, Notre Dame, they're not very far off from Penn State, but also that Penn State game, we didn't have the change at quarterback. And I mentioned last week, a little worried about rushing opportunities getting taken away from Marks, especially down in the red zone. So that could play into this as well. This is, like I said, a cautious pick. This is not a hard sit pick, but this is a, really think about it. If you've got better options out there that you think can definitely hit 17 points, then I would say go with them, even though Marks has been super reliable lately. I really like this matchup here for Colorado. I'm definitely going to say start LeJontay Wester. Over the last 3 weeks, he's been averaging 15.5 fantasy points per game. He's scored 17 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. Despite the bad game last week against Kansas, Colorado still has the number 5 fantasy pass offense. Oklahoma State, I think it's going to be a big bounce back game for them. So they're going to shake off that Kansas loss. They still have their hopes of making the Big 12 championship game, trying to make the playoffs. And Oklahoma State is just really bad. Vegas is agreeing with my thoughts here. Vegas is calling for 40.5 points to be scored by Colorado. This Oklahoma State defense is awful. They're number 123 in fantasy pass defense, 1.9 passing touchdowns given up per game, 67% red zone touchdowns allowed rate. And what really stands out, this is pretty bad. They're giving up third downs 46.3% of the time. Colorado is going to take advantage of all of these awesome matchup stats. And the Texas Tech game, or Texas Tech, excuse me, last week against Oklahoma State, they put up 56 points on them. And I'm seeing big things for Colorado. Looking at this, the similar performances that we have from Colorado is Texas Tech and Colorado State. Texas Tech was ranked 132nd in fantasy pass defense. Colorado State ranked 100th, and Western put up 20.2 and 25 fantasy points. So this is probably my favorite passing matchup of the week. Definitely, you got Colorado guys, get them in your lineup. For a sit suggestion, I'm going to go with Ty Felton. And it might sound odd after he put up 23.7 fantasy points against a good Iowa defense last week. Why am I saying to sit him? This is going to be the best secondary they faced all year, even better than Iowa's. Penn State, they got the number 13 fantasy pass defense. They're giving up just under 1 passing touchdown per game, and they're giving up touchdowns in the red zone 40% of the time. Looking here, Felton has only scored under 18 points twice. And that's the games that you're seeing here on the screen with Oregon and Indiana. He put up 14.2 and 8.8 fantasy points. Oregon is ranked 5th in fantasy pass defense. Indiana is ranked 18th, right around what we're seeing from this Penn State ranking. I'm just not willing to bet on Felton coming through in Happy Valley this week. For a tight end start, I like Rondé Gadsden from Syracuse. He's been one of the hottest tight ends lately. He's averaging 23.9 fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks. He's taking on Miami. Miami's run defense, I think, is a lot better than Syracuse is at running the ball. And I think it's going to force Syracuse to emphasize the passing game a lot more in their game plan. Syracuse has the number 95th ranked fantasy run defense, or excuse me, offense, and Miami has the number 18 fantasy run defense. Um, it's not a very good matchup there for the run. Miami, though, they're number 41 in fantasy pass defense. They're giving up almost 1.5 passing touchdowns per game, which is an average number. The red zone touchdown rate, third down conversion rates are also average. Um, Looking for similar matchups. Why I think Gadsden's going to have a good day here. Both these matchups happened in the last two games. UConn had the number 58 ranked fantasy pass defense. He put up 28.5 fantasy points. Cal had the number 46th ranked fantasy pass defense. He put up 19 fantasy points. And he had a total of 22 targets over these two games. This is a great recipe for success. It's going to be a good competitive game. It's at home for Syracuse, which I like as well. The sit suggestion, Harold Fanning, Bowling Green. I'm bringing it up because there might be some fantasy owners that don't realize that he got injured last week. I'm not really even going to go over the matchups in this one. I've heard everything. He started this week as questionable, or excuse me, as doubtful. Then he was moved up to questionable. Now I'm hearing it's a game time decision. You're definitely going to have to monitor the injury status throughout the week if you've got him. The reason I'm covering him as a sit is because you need to make a backup plan if he can't play. One of the things I would say then too to look at is whoever you might look at for a tight end, find someone who kicks off around the same time or later in the day. That way, if you're going to make a last minute pull of him from your lineup, you have the option to do that instead of someone who has an early game. Or you can play it safe and leave him on the bench if you've got a deep enough roster here. Miami of Ohio, they are a good pass defense. I think Banning would still have a decent day if he's playing hurt and he makes it out there. My biggest thing, man, stay on top of the injury situation, have your backup plan, and don't get caught with your pants down, especially during the championship. That wraps up the Stardom Situm preview for Week 14. Once again, if you want to catch all of my player selections, you can go over to my article on letpurplerain.com. I have a link to that article in the description. If you're not already a subscriber, you can sign up for a 7-day free trial. Check out my premium section for my start sits, as well as what's going to start on 12/5 for coverage is the 2024 CFF Top Gun Challenge. I mentioned it at the start of the show here. You're going to have Campus to Canton, Let Purple Rain, RotoWire, and the CFF site all competing as we compare our preseason player projections to the final stats of the best CFF players this year. And we're going to find out who is the best of the best at preseason projections. I want to thank you for reading and watching everything that I'm putting out on Let Purple Rain. You're the reason that I keep doing this work. Once again, like and subscribe here to the YouTube channel. This channel is going to be growing through the end of this year and all throughout next year. Thanks again for joining the Let Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF reign starts here.